Assalamu alaikum everybody. I am still in Paris. Reason for being in Paris, because as for today, I still do not have a motorcycle. The situation is a bit weird because when I came to France, I brought with me some cash to buy a motorcycle because that's what I thought I would do. But for some weird reason, every time I call someone on the internet where I find the motorcycles and I tell them I'm going to be buying your bike, they say, I tell them I have cash for you, they just freak out. Nobody wants to take my cash. And they want me to have a certified cashier's check, but I don't have a bank account in France, so I couldn't get a bike here. I guess it's just part of the adventure. So now I'm going to be traveling to Germany where I can get a motorcycle, and then I come back from Germany to get it registered and get all the paperwork done. And if you hate bureaucracy, this is not the place. Sometimes we find it very easy to talk about some Islamic traditions and principles that stem from either the Quran or the Sunnah. But when you see these principles propagate themselves in real life, it just puts you in a whole different dimension in terms of how we deal with divine text and how we do implement it. Today, inshallah, since I'm still in Paris, I consider myself a little bit stuck here because of this whole bureaucracy thing. I wanted to share an amazing story that is related to this historic city. France has been an empire before, just like England was. And empires, they tend to have an effect on their colonies sometimes hundreds of years after the empire implodes on itself, when it can no longer sustain all its colonies, and you have all kinds of resistance movements all over the place, and then the human toll becomes too big, so the empires, just like the French Empire, tends to retreat onto its or into its borders. The history that the France has with many Muslim countries goes a long way. Namely, as I said in the last video, that about a lot of Muslim North Africans who fought for France and liberated from Nazi Germany. The island of the Corse, called La Corse, in the Mediterranean, was completely liberated by North Africans, Moroccans, Algerians, and so on. Today, we're going to talk about a principle of Islam of coexistence and standing up for justice. Not only did Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian soldiers fight the Nazis in World War II, but some civilians, Muslim civilians living in French territory, showed lots of resistance and heroic acts that are unfortunately lost to history, or it's not important for the media to talk about. The media focuses on terrorism, media focuses on drama and all kinds of controversial things, but they will never, or seldom, they will talk about somebody who had a positive impact from a humane point of view. So before I go into today's historic site in Paris, I'd like to start with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran in terms of freedom of religion and tolerance. You all know the ayah that says La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion, which means that nobody can force nobody to convert to Islam by force. And we see it throughout the Muslim world, where you have churches and synagogues, temples. You have millions of Arab Christians living in Muslim countries all over the place. A long time ago I told you about the biggest temple for the Buddhists. The biggest Buddhist temple in the world is in Indonesia, still intact, tourist attraction. Nobody wanted to ruin it. So this is a tradition we have, and when the Jews, escaped the persecution all over Europe, I mean, not only in World War I or World War II, I mean, even a long time before that, where did they escape? With the fall of Andalusia, they ran to Muslim countries, and they still, some of them still live there, and their homes, their neighborhoods, their businesses, their synagogues are still standing. So Islam does not have a problem coexisting with anybody. Again, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants your heart, does not want your appearance. So if you don't believe, you don't follow this faith from the heart, there's no good in doing it by force. But what I find interesting is what some of the Western scholars had said about Islam, and some Europeans, some Americans, contradictory to what some people said, that Islam had spread by the sword and fire. This is mostly a European view of Islam, and it cannot be any close to the truth. From the books written by Westerners, there's a Orientalist known as Montgomery Watt. He said that most of these countries that the Muslims had conquered had opened outside of the Arab Peninsula, or what we call people of the book, Ahlul Kitab. The term jihad was not imposed onto people so that they convert by force, but so for them to recognize the rule of the Islamic government, and as a force that will protect them, hence the concept of al-jizya. Montgomery goes on and saying that they were protected under Islamic law. You all know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that said that man aada dhimmiyan, or man aada dhimmiyan kuntu khasmahu aw aduwahu yawm al-qiyamah. He says, whosoever hurts a non-Muslim living under the Muslim government, the Prophet Muhammad says, I will be his enemy. So this is a hadith not quoted by the author, but I'm just continuing with what he says. And he says that for the Islamic government, the Islamic State, it was an honor that there was something very strict to protect these minorities. So for the Europeans to claim that Islam spread by the sword of fire was a misconception. Montgomery goes on and saying that the purpose of war in Islam is not to force people to accept Islam. In its theory, you can find it in divine text, in the Quran and the Hadith, and also in reality throughout history. And if anybody takes that as a principle of Islam, then Montgomery says, then they don't know nothing about this deen. And this is not a Muslim speaking. This is just a man who traveled through the Middle East, traveled through Muslim countries, and he was writing his observations. There is another author, his name is Sir T.W. Arnold. His book named Ad-Da'watu ila al-Islam, or the Call to Islam. He says he says in his book, in page 51, that some of the examples that we have given about the coexistence principles in Islam, that the Muslims, the victor Muslims, I mean al-Dhafirun, mean those people who have conquered Arab Christians in the first century of after migration and continued in other generation, we can conclude that these Christian tribes had accepted Islam by choice, free will. And the Christian Arabs who live in our times between large groups of Muslims are a witness to this principle of coexistence and accepting the other. As I told you, there's so many Arab Christians still living all over the place, all over Muslim countries now. So nobody can come here and accuse Muslims of being intolerant. And he says in page 48 that we can judge the good relationships that is standing between Muslims and Christians, throughout history, that the force or power was not the main factor for people to convert to Islam. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says, when he had treaties with Arab Christian tribes, he took upon himself to protect them and give them freedom of religion, freedom to practice their religion, as Not only that, he allowed the the clergy or any Christian leadership to enjoy their rights and their power over their constituency, over their congregation. Um, it just is mind blowing that no Muslim country had ever interfered with any church affairs. Oh, we don't like this pope, we don't like this cardinal, oh, you gotta change this leader. Like it's happening nowadays, if you know what I'm saying. They give them free will to elect, to choose their leaders. Ya subhanallah. There is a book called Hadaratul Arab, or The Civilization of Arabs. This is Dr. Gustave Le Bon. Gustave Le Bon is a man who had traveled to Arabia, lived amongst them. This is in the late 1900s. And he studied their way of lives, and this was when the early photography. He took a bunch of pictures, even including the Kaaba and Al-Hajj also. And he had written a book in French in 1888. That was first time translated to Arabic in 1947. He says about the spread of Islam in page 127 and 128. He says, and the reader will see that when we dig deep in the Arab conquests, and the reason for their victory and their power was not the main factor of the spread of the Quran. So the Quran was not spread by the power of the Arabs, but the Arabs left the defeated nations free in their religions. As the interpretation of Christianity and use the Arabic language, that's why the Christian Arabs always call God Allah. That's from what they saw from the justice of the Arab conquerors. Of course, this author, says Arab because that's what they see. This, back then, because he went to the Arab Peninsula and to Mecca and so on. But this was a principle. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had many non-Arab officers, Sahaba, companions around him, and he says when these conquered tribes saw justice in the Arab conquerors, this justice, which did not exist in their former leaders from their own people, and how easy it was to teach Islam, and how easy it was to recognize these principles of justice even towards your enemy. This is not a Muslim writing this. These are people who want to study Muslims and write about them, and they're just honest, writing what they saw. And he says, and the history shows that other religions were imposed by force. So when the Christians defeated the Arabs in Al-Andalus, in today's Spain, they preferred killing, expulsion, rather than leaving Islam. Many of them died, and many of them was expulsed from out of their homes, out of their countries, simply because they loved Islam. That shows that nobody accepted Islam by force. Al-Quran did not spread by the sword, but it was spread by a da'wah, by invitation, teaching, calling to the path of Islam. And with da'wah alone, all these nations had adopted and accepted Islam. And the Quran reached all the way to India. How? Through tradesmen, merchants, and so on. He says, if in the same book, he showed the tolerance of Islam against other religions, and he compared that with the harshness of the Crusaders against the Muslims, and how he saw that when they attacked Jerusalem in 1099, one of their the priests had recorded how the Muslims were slaughtered, or anyone who stood with the Muslims was slaughtered. He said they didn't leave a single soul living. Compare that to when Islam moves into a place and gives freedom of religion. In the Quran, the Quran says in Surah Al-Nahl, ayah 125, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. Call to the path of your Lord. How? Using wisdom, good advice, and good advice. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. When you argue them with a better argument, with good manners. إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ ضَلَّ. Allah is most knowledgeable of those who have lost their path. ضَلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. And He is most knowledgeable of those who are to be guided. So, and in Surah Al-Baqarah, as I said, ayah 256, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. No compulsion in religion. The truth, the guidance has been is clear and obvious from misguidance. So there's so many things we can say about the spirit of Islam and how large Muslim nations exist today, not because any soul had conquered or reached them. Take, for example, the largest Muslim country in the world, 250 million people living in Indonesia. All of them accepted Islam through businessmen. They saw their mannerism, they saw their honesty, doing business, in social settings and so on. So I take these principles that I just said, a couple of ayats from the Quran, one hadith of the Prophet and a bunch of paragraphs from Orientalist writers as a segue to go into today's story, because today we were in the Grand Mosque of Paris, as we will see.
Assalamu alaikum. So, alright guys, so finally we get a break in the weather. It was raining for a whole week. The entire week it was raining non-stop, and we finally get a break in the weather, and we are here in a very special location. So just buried in the middle of Paris city center, you can see that there is a minaret right above my head. We are now at the Grand Mosque of Paris. Let's go inside and take a look and find out why this place is so special. See you later.
Searching the Grand Mosque of Paris, I came across a bunch of articles and materials, and I tried to choose the most interesting ones. I found the New York Times in October 3rd, 2011, published an article called Heroic Tale of Holocaust with a Twist. Let's see what the twist is all about. So, it says in Paris, the stories of the Holocaust has been documented and distorted, classified, through memory. And then he says in a few paragraphs down, Muslims, it seems, rescued Jews from Nazis. It says Les Hommes Libres, or Freemen, is a tale of courage not found in French textbooks. According to the story, Siqadour bin Gharbit, the founder and rector of the Grand Mosque of Paris, provided refuge and certificates of Muslim identity to small number of Jews to allow them to evade arrest and deportation. Of course, eventually they were going to get inseminated in concentration camps. So it was simpler than it sounds. In the early 1940s, France was home to a large population of North Africans, including thousands of Sephardic Jews. The Jews spoke Arabic and shared many of the same traditions and everyday habits as the Arabs. Neither Muslims nor Jews ate pork. Both Muslims and Jews were circumcised. Muslims and Jews were often similar. I mean, when I was back in Morocco, you would not notice a Jewish person outside they tell you they were Jews, because they might just have a regular name, unless some of them took French names and so on. Well, it was not only the Imam who was the founder of the masjid, it was the director. One of his other Imams, as you know, we have masajid with 2 or 3 Imams. Another Imam has an even more interesting story doing this Jewish people rescue. Move on to another man. His name is Muhammad Misli. This man is still alive. He's a retired public servant in Paris. He says, Mon père l'imam sauveur de Juifs, or my father the imam savior of Jews. He says that in 2010 my wife was organizing the house, and she ended up looking through some papers of my father's, and he said that his father never talked about this, and he says this. He says that we started uncovering things about my father. So let's see what Muhammad Mesli is about to say about his Imam dad from Paris. He says that the Imam was born in Algeria in 1902. He arrived in France at the age of 17, where he worked as a docker in the south of France, then as a carpenter, then he went to work in the mines. I mean, he was doing all kinds of labor. By the early 1930s, he was nominated as an imam in the mosque. So he had, as you know, back then, all kids had to go to Quranic school, to Islamic studies. So it was natural, a natural thing for him to get that position, especially when you go to France, where there are very few Islamically educated people. So, 1930, he was nominated one of the Imams of Paris. By the way, he was not paid for this position. He volunteered. He did it for free. Well, as we will find out, he did a lot of things for free. So we're traveling through history with Mr. or Sheikh Abdul Qadir Mesli. He was. They said that he was born in Wahran. Oran is a city, coastal city in north of Algeria. He worked under Imam Qaddour bin Gharbit. Qaddour bin Gharbit was the director and Imam, and Abdul Qadir Mesli was also Imam. He participated in all kinds of activities, but the most interesting they did is that some historians archived that they saved between 500 to 1600 Jews by giving them fake Muslim identification. How? When the Nazis were searching the streets and the back alleys and the apartments and the closets of Paris, they were simply looking for Jews to send them to concentration camps. Well, some of the Jews found escape where? In the Grand Mosque of Paris. Now, this Imam, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Mesli, they would take this Jewish person and they will sign a document that they are Muslim, they're not Jewish, so that they can escape to Switzerland, they can escape to Morocco, Algeria, or they can go somewhere where they can find refuge and will not be exterminated. So they will give them fake birth certificates, and they will try to make it look old. They bring a bunch of witnesses, and guy named Shlomo, all of a sudden his name is Abdul Salam. Guy named Moshe, all of a sudden his name is Musa, and so on. And they did that throughout the 1940s. Now, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs which was also under the German occupation, they smelled this stuff, and they knew that Mr. Mesli was engaging in acts of resistance against German powers, and things were about to get worse for them. Mr. or Imam Abdul Qadir Mesli was then sent to Bordeaux. He was sent to Bordeaux by the mosque in Paris to act as a chaplain in the fort of Duha. It was a camp it was a Nazi camp for Muslim, in which there were a lot of Muslim resistance fighters, a lot of Muslim troops who were detained there. So they sent him there to work and help these people, but he did not stop. So he kept producing these fake certificates when he found Jews, because they had a separate treatment. They were to be killed, and he helped a lot of people to escape from the camp, even sometimes negotiating with the commandants. And to do this, he had to have a lot of courage. Those Nazis, they were not playing around. Back in Paris, Imam bin Gharbit, he sent a letter to him and told him to be careful, because a lot of people found out. But Imam Mesli, he wrote back. He says, "I will take your recommendations seriously that you have told me." They're trying not to talk about the issue, but my mission is clear, and I will be very, very careful about the activities I do outside of my mission. And because he was denounced in July 1944, he was accused of organizing the reception and the harboring of North Africans and helping them escape from the camp. And he himself was then deported to Dachau by Mauthausen Ibn Zia in Germany in May 24, 1945, where he was tortured. He said later to his son that every single bone in his body was broken at a certain time. It was very tough times, very hard times, but he had endured a concentration camp. For what? For saving Jews. And nobody gives this man a medal of honor or talks about him. They only glorify crazy terrorists on TV. They don't glorify people like this. The reason I'm making this lecture for you guys is to know that whatever Allah tells us in the Quran and the Sunnah is true and will not die away. And we have people who come throughout history to implement those principles. Even if the majority of us fail to be good Muslims or try this, there are people who don't fail. And this man laid his life, or put his life in line, under Nazi occupation because he believed what he preached. Imam Abdul Qadir Masli, he says, a lot of certificates testify to the bad treatment he had endured, but he had never given up one name of his associates. He had never, spelled out a single piece of information to the Nazis, despite the torture. He resisted even when he was under torture. He was badly treated and he became very sick. And up until the end of World War II, when the American troops liberated his camp, that's when he was able to travel back to Paris. For the first time, he would have some time of peace. He got married. He had a boy and a girl. But he died and left them very young. He died the 21st of June of 1961. He rarely spoke about war, even to his closest members of the family. But his heroic acts, they have fallen and forgotten.